What'd you think about the media coverage of the election? Obviously, the pollsters blew it. Rule out people like MSNBC, who some of them were slack-jawed and couldn't even speak at the results of this election, Rachel Maddow. And just in general, we've talked about the bias in the media quite often, but now we have a poll to back up some of what our suspicions have been. Tim Graham is with us. He's the director of media analysis at the Media Research Center. And Tim, thanks for your time.
Sure.
Let's talk about your poll. Tell us, this was a post-election poll on how voters perceived the media's influence on this presidential race.
Yes. And I would say, I suppose we weren't surprised by the results, but we want to make this point clear, and that is the American people know the media is tilted, and they've resolved to just sort of factor that in or even ignore it. We found 7 in 10 voters, or almost 7 in 10, 69%, do not believe the news media are honest and truthful in what they're offering the public. 8 in 10, almost 8 in 10, 78% of voters said they believe the news coverage of the presidential campaign was biased. There was nearly a 3-to-1 majority on that, believing the media were for Clinton, 59%. 21% said the media was biased for Trump. I don't know where they're coming from, but okay. But even a third of the Clinton voters, 32% of the Clinton voters said they thought the media were pro-Clinton because they were actually paying attention. So, we have a media that openly proclaimed that they felt it was their duty, it was their job to ensure that President Hillary Clinton was elected and that Donald Trump was denied the office.
And you saw some of that through the WikiLeaks information that came out, and we saw it rubbed under our nose in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think some of these emails were just so amazing. One of my favorites was Mark Leibovich, who's a political sort of feature writer for the New York Times. And you can tell they have a very cozy relationship because the communications director, Jennifer Palmieri, is like, sorry, I'm on my iPhone. I can't cut and paste this the way I want. That, to me, really tells you, how what's the word I'm looking for?
How in bed they were with each other.
Supine, some fancy word like that. How obedient the news media are, and and they make fake news. For example, the Washington Post had a story on Miley Cyrus, spontaneously visiting dorms in George Mason University. Well, in reality, you can't spontaneously visit dorms at George Mason University.
Right.
It's a violation of their solicitation policy. None of that went in the Washington Post story. The Washington Post story did a gushy piece about Miley walked in and everybody was, gobsmacked. There she was, and everybody was for Hillary, and it was wonderful. Well, it was prearranged, pre-approved. You'll knock on these 4 doors. Everyone behind the doors will be Hillary voters, and, it's a Potemkin village.
Who did you interview for this poll? Who were the people that took part?
It was just a random sample, the people that do the YouGov poll.
Okay.
We contracted them to go out and survey voters. It's a poll of 2,006 voters conducted on November 9 and 10. That's Wednesday and Thursday after the election. 97% of these people said they did not let the media's bias influence their vote. I think it's awfully hard to not let the bias influence your vote. It's good to say I make up my own mind.
Right.
I would have to confess, I believe the media when they said Donald Trump's not going to win. I kind of bought into that. So, even if you're opposed to the media, you can take that conventional wisdom that they churn out, if you want to call it wisdom, and it factors in. And that's what we're concerned about.
Yeah, and it almost makes you more than 3% of people were influenced by that. So that's why when I read that particular part of the study, I was a little surprised. Maybe it's almost like the people who were asked in polls, who are you going to vote for? They weren't quite sure they wanted to admit they were voting for Trump. So maybe the polls didn't quite reflect that. I almost wonder if this question wasn't answered the same way. Well, I know that the media is biased, but it didn't affect me. They're not about to admit that. You know,
they read it as, "Are you a mind-numbed robot who does whatever the anchormen tell you to do?"
Exactly. You have to wonder. I'm not, and going forward, I'm not asking you to comment on this necessarily, but I was watching a CNN piece this morning covering one of these protests. They had some kids walk out of school to protest immigration in, I believe it was Los Angeles, to protest the immigration crackdown. They had kids in tears in the story. And as part of the story, they said that they're upset because Donald Trump has promised to immediately deport 2 to 3 million people. And they didn't bother to add the fact that what he specifically said was if you're a felon, if you're suspected of or convicted of this subset of crimes, very serious crimes, we're getting rid of you. They didn't bother to mention that in the story. He's not going to randomly go door to door and pull people out of their house and send them home. But these are the kind of things that erode trust in the media.
Yes, and we had a story right a couple of blocks from my house in Northern Virginia, where an illegal alien a couple of years ago, drunk, plowed into a car full of nuns, killing one, injuring another, had been in deportation proceedings several times to send him back to Bolivia. This is the kind of person that Trump's talking about. Somebody who, who's killed people, either, murdered or just manslaughtered. That's the sort of person that you've forfeited your right to be here. And that's not the story they're going to tell, right? They're going to show you the crying Latinos in Los Angeles. They're not going to show you the car scene with the dead nun in it.
Yeah, I've got that story. In fact, I'm going to play here in a little while just so people can hear it because it's unbelievable. Tim Graham with the Media Research Council. Listen, I appreciate your time. And what's the website if people want to go look at this
here at
research?
Newsbusters.org.
Awesome. I appreciate your time, Tim.
Sure.
Have a great day. Thank you very much. Tim Graham is the Director of Media Analysis there for MRC, and you can go to the Newsbusters website to read more on that poll. 69% of people do not believe the news media to be honest and truthful, and they have no one to blame but themselves. They don't.